The Packers signed Aaron Banks and Nate Hobbs, two players who will make the team better in 2025. But this is still a disappointing start to a free agency period that was supposed to be marked by an urgency to win Super Bowls.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Aaron Banks in 4 years, 77. Nate Hobbs in 4 years, 48. They make the team better. There's no question. Yet why does it feel hollow? We're going to hear from Brian Peacock from Locked On 49ers about Aaron Banks later in the show. We're going to hear from your boy Q from Locked On Raiders on Nate Hobbs later in the show. I like these players. I like their fit in Green Bay. But when you are Brian Gutekunst and you spend an offseason, at least until this point, when you've been in front of microphones talking about how the team needs to be better rushing for, how the organization needs to have more urgency trying to win Super Bowls. And it's important that we note that statement. It was not about the team going, any extra version of all in. It was coaches. Hey, we got to win right now. This is the time. Players, hey, no more young team stuff. This is the moment right now. Buckle up. Put the big boy football pants on and let's go. Let's lock in. That's what he's saying, Locked On. That's what Brian Gutekunst was saying. DK Metcalf on the trade block gets traded. Davante Adams in free agency. Sean McVay went out of his way, sent him a 10-minute cut-up explaining how Davante Adams would fit in LA. Signed exactly the deal I suggested for weeks on this show. DJ Reed, a perfect fit for the Packers, signs a deal that I would have done 20 days out of 20. Trey Hendrickson's still out there. Maybe they make that move. Josh Sweat, nope. They didn't do anything that makes you excited as a fan that things are going to be different this season. Like, they got better. We talked about the ways that I think Aaron Banks can unlock the best version of this team potentially. Elgton Jenkins as a center and Jordan Morgan competing at left tackle. Maybe he competes at right guard. You're giving yourself options and depth, and that's great. And Nate Hobbs comes in and gives you, who I think is I've always been, I think, higher than consensus on Nate Hobbs. He makes them better. But this was a top 10 defense last year. The coverage was kind of fine. The corners were pretty fine. Now they had to play more cover two to protect those corners, but they found a way to make it work. Like, if it works, it works. An upgrade, and let's be honest, it's an upgrade, but it's a marginal upgrade. It's not like they went from, Carrington Valentine to, Jair Alexander, who is probably going to be traded. That's not what happened. It was obvious the pass rush was something that needed to be upgraded. Leaving that to the draft is an enormous risk. And when you're a team that is supposed to be urgent in winning a Super Bowl, I think fans are justified in wanting more. And that's not to say that the money spent is not in service of a Super Bowl. It is. Like, I think the whole premise of, oh, the Packers they're just capable. They're just content winning 11 or 12 games and one playoff round, and that's all that they care. No. This is being done in service of making the team better to go win a Super Bowl. And I think there's been a lot of criticisms of the receiver room that has strayed so far from reality. Even Packers owns fans now buying into the hype that this is a bunch of wide receiver threes and they suck and they stink and they suck. Despite the fact that this was the third best passing offense by DVOA, which is adjusting for schedule. Oh, they did it against a weak schedule. Yeah, that adjusts for the schedule and the situations in the games. All that is true. But Packer fans who wanted more, wanted bigger, wanted the team to think bigger. Given that a bunch of money was spent, like I think it would almost have been better if they'd just done nothing in some ways to perception, because then it's like they're keeping the powder dry. We'll see. They didn't really do anything. It can feel like a half measure. And again, I want to be crystal clear about this. I liked the players that they got. I like both players. They make the team better. The team is better today than it was the last time we saw them play football. Like, there's no question to me about that. And I think the level of which there is a gap between the Packers and the Lions and the Vikings, I think they've closed that gap, because I think the Lions are worse and I think the Vikings are going to be worse because of the quarterback situation. Well, we thought that last year too, but we've seen Sam Darnold play decent football. JJ McCarthy has never played NFL football ever. So I want that to be clear. But when you could have made a DK Metcalf deal, when you could have offered, okay, your second round pick is not going to do it, a second and a fifth, you're 2 spots different from the Steelers. Or you could have offered Devontae Adams the money that the Rams offered him. And maybe he always wanted to go to LA and it wouldn't have mattered. But maybe if you offer him, 2 years, 50, a couple extra million might help. Maybe he always goes to LA. But the fact that it's being reported that they didn't even call, they didn't even pick up the phone, that does not relay to the fan base that you're doing everything with a sense of urgency to go win a Super Bowl. So there is a difference between, hey, these moves over here, they made the team better. Yes, I think that's true. I agree. I think in general, money well spent to improve the team. And it's not just that it's a guard and a corner who may be a slot corner, and it wasn't the corner everyone thought. One of the 2 or 3, I think Charvarius Ward and DJ Reed were the corners most people thought. Charvarius Ward ended up getting much more money. But like the Reed deal, not that different from the one that the Packers gave to Nate Hobbs for a player who I think has been better most of his career. Now, that's not to say that Nate Hobbs can't be better in Green Bay than he's been in Las Vegas. Josh Jacobs was that. And we've seen that. Zadarius Smith, better in Green Bay. We talked about this the other day. Preston Smith, his best career years in Green Bay. Billy Turner, his best years in Green Bay. Adrian Amos, his best years in Green Bay. So that's what you're paying for when you're bringing in these free agents. Not who they were, but who they can be for you. But I said this before free agency. I wrote this for the Leap. There are too many quality veteran options out there, pass catchers, pass rushers, to not get one of those guys. And to date, the Packers have not gotten one of those guys. So it's a disappointment. The team is better, and it can still be disappointing. It's kind of like the 2024, not the 2023, the 2024 Packers season. They got better. They were better. By every metric, they were better. By record, by all the underlying metrics, they were better. But it didn't feel that way, did it? It didn't feel that way. That's kind of how this free agency feels. They're better, but it kind of feels underwhelming. And maybe that's a better phrasing than disappointing. It's not disappointing because the team is better, but it's underwhelming. That's where the team is right now. All right. Let's talk to your boy Q. Let's start there with Nate Hobbs, the cornerback, and then we'll talk to Brian Peacock because we can talk to Brian about the 49ers, lessons to learn from that build and maybe things to avoid, and Aaron Banks in that one as well. Don't worry, we're going to be talking a lot more about these guys as we move through the offseason and how they can contribute so much more time. There's months of air to fill between now and September when the games kick off. Don't worry, we'll get to all of that. But first, Raiders, Nate Hobbs will do that next on Locked On Packers. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. You always have to identify a couple underdogs that you like early in the process. Okay, I like this 7 seed to make a run. Hey, this 6 seed, they could be an Elite 8 team. Hey, this 4 seed, they could be a Final 4 team. That's when you're getting good odds. That's when you're getting good value. FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, game props, futures, all the good stuff. And with tournament games happening almost every day, we got conference tournaments the rest of the weekend. The FanDuel app is simple and easy to use. Plus, when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. Visit FanDuel.com and get into the college hoops action all tournament long. I don't think a lot of Packer fans had Nate Hobbs on their bingo card for the Green Bay Packers in free agency, so I thought I'd call my pal Q to talk about what this means for the Green Bay Packers. Q, there was a great Q&A in The Athletic with Nate Hobbs, letting us get to know him a little bit. What was your first experience like? You get to see these guys, you get to talk to them. What was your first experience like with him? And what was a really terrific rookie season for him?
Yeah, Nate's fantastic, man. He's a hell of a dude, right? You're gonna really like Nate as a person. He comes with the edge to him. He comes with a chip on his shoulder, which is great for a corner, right? A slot corner in particular. A guy who's a jack of all trades. He'll tell you that, yeah, he plays slot, but he could play outside. He's a football player. He just wants to be lined up on the field. He wants to win. Like I said, he comes with a lot of edge to him. You know, he always talks about where he came from and the fact that not many believed in him and he made it out from where he's from. And so, you know, I mean, all those good stories. He's that guy. He's always the guy that makes himself available following games, win, lose, whatever the case may be. He might not give you a ton of time, but he's going to give you some time, right? He's going to allow you to ask a few questions. He'll give you his thoughts and then keep him moving. But I mean, the dude's just he's a really good dude. I was really shocked to see the Packers roll out the kind of money that they did. And I know that there's all kind of, you know, the devil's in the details when it comes to contracts. But man, I was shocked to see him go off the board that quickly, not because he's not a good player, because he is when he's on the field. It's just the last couple seasons he's been banged up quite a bit. So I didn't know what the Packers were going to, or any other team how much they were going to value him at. So when I saw the contract offer for Nate, I was like, wow, you know, hats off to him. He was a former 5th round pick, but yeah, I was surprised to see that he went off the board so quickly. But the Packers got a good one, especially when he's healthy.
So you mentioned that the health part, the injuries part. Often we see teams go, hey, look, we like this guy. They just can't stay on the field. The Packers are going through this right now with Jair Alexander.
Yeah.
But so, okay, you saw that number. It is an eye-popping number. I think, you know, there was estimations that he was going to get much smaller numbers in free agency. I think the big question that Packer fans want to know is, can he live up to this contract? Can he play like a high-level cornerback on a playoff team?
Yeah, I mean, when he's on the field, man, he's great. He really is. The thing I really like about him is not only is he really good at the slot corner spot, and I mean, again, you can play him wherever you want. You can put him outside. It doesn't matter. If you had to put him at safety in case of emergency, he would play that position as well. He's always looking for the ball, but he's physical. Right, he's one of those guys that doesn't mind getting in there and tackling and getting a TFL and you know, attacking the ball carrier. Like that's really, and that's, you know, sometimes that hurts him because he gets hurt, right? Because he'll go out there and he'll lay his body out there, and that's what we appreciate. We get excited as fans. We're like, oh yeah, that guy's a dog, and then every once in a while that dog gets banged up. So sometimes he gets injured. It's not necessarily his fault. It's just that he's giving you everything he's got. So yeah, he could definitely live up to it. Again, my big thing, and I thought he was going to have a huge year in 2024 for the Raiders because I knew it was a contract year, and I was like, oh, man, he's going to really ball out. And unfortunately, he missed a handful of games towards the end of the season due to the ankle and foot injury, and so it's like, oh, man, it just stinks for him. But good, good for him to be able to get that big contract from the Packers. And now he's there with Keyshawn Nixon, knows him really well, knows Josh Jacobs really well, knows Rich Bisaccia really well. So he'll be in good hands there in Green Bay for sure.
Yeah, we'll get to the Rich Bisaccia piece of this because I love that he is still affecting the Green Bay Packers years after leaving Las Vegas. Like, it really is remarkable the kind of reach that he has. Talk to me about this outside versus slot thing, because he comes in, he plays the slot and outside. He's been for most of his career there, based on at least what I've watched and what I've gleaned from the charting, is in base. Like, he's a starting corner. He plays the boundary. But when they're a nickel, and teams are a nickel like 75% of the time, he is their slot corner. So it's not that he's not a boundary corner. It's just that they like him in nickel in the slot. They tried him in 2022, I believe it was, as a more full-time outside player, moved him back into the slot. Why is this the role that he's found? Like, what is it about his coverage ability, about what he's done? Because the defenses have changed too over the years. He's played in 4 different defensive systems in 4 years?
Yeah, pretty much, right? And so he got comfortable in Patrick Graham's scheme the last few years. But honestly, he's way better at the slot. And I think that that's even more difficult. The boundary, at least you have the boundary to help you, right? I mean, in the slot, you can go anywhere as a wide receiver. So I think that that's his best, like, natural fit. He's played the boundary. He played it a little bit, but he didn't really play it that much. Like, I mean, I don't know what the analytical numbers say or the charts say, or, whatever the depth chart would say. But I mean, the dude was your nickel. He was your slot corner all the time. Like, last year it was Jacorian Bennett, and it was Jack Jones, and then it was Nate Hobbs in the slot. Right. I mean, that's just how it went. And when It's
so weird that his body type is such the opposite of that. Like, Jack Jones is so much more body type wise a slot. Right. And yet he has the movement skills. You watch him cover like Ladd McConkey in the slot, and you're just like, someone 5'11", 197 should not be, with long arms, should not be able to move like that.
Right, exactly. That's the thing about it. And so that's why he's so good. And when they put him in that position, it's funny because I developed a really good relationship with him. And I remember when he started bouncing back and forth, I remember in the preseason game, his rookie year, I think it was against the Rams, he had an interception from playing in the outside. And it was funny because it was, you would call it bad coverage if you're watching him film, because he just broke off his guy. Like, he read it so well. He just knew where the ball was going. So he just broke off. Was like, I'm going to go get the ball. So normally, like, on film, you'd say, that was not, you can't do that. You can't freelance like that. But he's instinctual. So he's got really good instincts. He's a really good tackler. He's very physical. He's smart. He's got an edge to him. He's got a chip on his shoulder. And I think that just makes for a really good corner. And again, the flexibility and the way that he can be used, the versatility, I think is fantastic. So again, he's a big loss for the Raiders defense for sure. The biggest thing that people are kind of like okay with is that he got paid so much money, and we know that he's been banged up quite a bit. So it's like, all right, well, they want to overpay for him. That's cool. But man, he really is really good when he's on the field.
We have to close on this Rich Bisaccia piece because, Keyshawn Nixon raved about him. That was one of the reasons why Rich brought him in, was that familiarity. But I mean, Nate Hobbs said Rich is like a second father to him, and one of the strongest father figures in his life. Rich was the assistant head coach for like 6 months, like less than 6 months, Q. Like, the impact that he had. I know he was in the locker room for longer than that, but we're talking about a core defensive player. Like, I assume he's not spending a ton of time with Rich Bisaccia, but to have that impact, like, are we just from the outside not understanding how impactful that guy was on the Raiders locker room in a pretty short amount of time?
I mean, he was the interim, right? He was the interim coach when everything went down with John Gruden, and he found a way to help them get to the playoffs. And look, I'll say this. I always say, don't go for the interim coach. Like, don't hire the interim coach. I don't mind standing corrected. And honestly, his relationship with that team was deeper than I think any of us really expected or even really knew, because you're right. Keyshawn Nixon has a great relationship with him. I know Josh Jacobs has a great relationship with him. Nate Hobbs has a great relationship with him. It's wild to think how big of an impact, like you said, he had on that team. And they really wanted him to be named the head coach. The Raiders went and made the move for Josh McDaniels. We know how that all shook out, and Rich Bisaccia is now in Green Bay. But it's just, I didn't realize, Peter, I'll be the first to tell you, I did not realize how big of an impact he had on those young men in that locker room. But clearly it was big time. And for a guy like Nate Hobbs to say he's like a second father, that says a lot. And he always, he'll speak from his put his heart on his sleeve. Like, he's not a guy that's going to, hold back his words. He'll give you a laugh. It's funny. if you ask Nate something in the locker room and he's got something, like there was a time when Keenan Allen was coming into Allegiant Stadium and he said, "Oh man, those corners are barbecue chicken." And it's funny because Nate had been out the week before, so Nate came back for that game in particular. And Keenan Allen had a terrible game, right? He didn't do anything. So after the game, someone asked him in the locker room. They said, "Hey, did you hear that barbecue chicken comment?" And he goes, "Barbecue chicken. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say on that." But I mean, it's just, it's like he just had that kind of like, yeah, I heard it. He's funny like that, right? So you're gonna get a lot of those from Nate, and just know that everything that he says like that means a lot more than what he's actually saying, the words he's putting behind it. But yeah, he's a good dude, man, and he's gonna be an impactful player for Green Bay for sure. And now he's got a chance to win too. Yeah, he's gonna definitely be excited.
All right, Q, I appreciate the time as always, man. Enjoy Eric Stokes, our guy. Take care of him. He is just a fun guy to be around, a smiley guy. I think you're gonna really like him out there. So take care of him. It's a nice trade. We appreciate it, and this is just like a flow now. Rich, Josh, Keyshawn, Nate, like we'll just take all the castaways that you guys don't want to pay. They're welcome in Green Bay.
Yeah, hey, Raiders to Vegas to Green Bay to Vegas. Why not? That's kind of how it goes. Took Devontae and then got rid of him. So there's that too.
All right. Let's talk Aaron Banks. Let's talk 49ers. The big bad 49ers are no more. It's over for them, at least as they were constructed. I think there's only 4 or 5 players from that 2019 Super Bowl team left on this current roster. We'll talk to Brian Peacock about it next on Locked On Packers. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's complete financial command and a command center for you to push all the buttons. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Money, one of the number one stressors of relationships. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Shortly before the legal tampering period and new league year started, the San Francisco 49ers traded Deebo Samuel to the Washington Commanders. That was just the start of the bloodletting in San Francisco. Talanoa Hufanga, Dre Greenlaw, Dravon Hargrave, Aaron Banks, all signing with new teams in free agency. Brian Peacock from Locked On 49ers joins me now. And Brian, we also have this reporting that maybe ownership is not thrilled with the cost of this team. What is going on right now for the 49ers? What is the plan to move forward here?
Well, clearly ownership is talking to some reporters, and you have to wonder what Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch think about all this with some airing of some public knowledge about how they've run things with basically a blank check for about 8 years now. And the 49ers have been to Super Bowls, haven't been able to win one. And I think a 6-11 season followed by an offseason where they're going to have to pay out, $150 million in guarantees potentially to a quarterback, probably started to tighten up the purse strings from ownership and Jed York. And they want to be a little smarter about some contracts going forward and maybe trim a little fat if they're going to do a big contract with, which is basically going to be twice as much guaranteed money of any contract they've ever done in franchise history when they signed Brock Purdy this offseason, which is presumably is the plan. And that will get done. Although the way things go with 49ers contracts, and if they're actually going to play more hardball, we'll see how difficult that contract is to get done. And so one of the big things with and look, 9 starters from week 1 last year are now gone for the 49ers. So, it's hard to Band-Aid that.
That's half the team.
But many of the plans were in place, and succession plans have already been sort of, they've already stuck the landing on some of those. And thankfully, they had a really good draft class last year, which allows them to replace Talanoa Hufanga with Malik Mustafa in the starting lineup, replace Charvarius Ward with Renardo Green in the starting lineup. They had Dominic Pooney, who was maybe the best rookie guard in the NFL last year, who they got in the 3rd round, who I think maybe isn't even a future offensive tackle potentially for them if they want to go that route. And but a really nice player there for them. So those things, and Deebo Samuel, the Z wide receiver spot, was replaced by their first round pick in Ricky Pearsall too. So a lot of heavy lifting done by the draft class last year, more heavy lifting to be done by the 2025 draft class after a 6-11 season, drafting 11 overall. They still have Trent Williams and Christian McCaffrey and Nick Bosa and Fred Warner and George Kittle. So they still have a very good football team with some star players and some expensive players. But the real problem here is how many players left all at once, and specifically the defensive line, where you're left with one starter and the free agent pool dwindling. You thought maybe Joey Bosa would take a little bit of a discount to play with his brother in San Francisco. He chose the Buffalo Bills, a little more money, and let's face it, maybe a better shot at winning Super Bowl than the San Francisco 49ers if he's ring chasing now at this point as well. And so the defensive line was probably the most important position for the 49ers to upgrade in the offseason. I don't think they lost that much in veterans Malik Collins and Leonard Floyd, but they still don't have bodies to replace them. And right now, guys like undrafted free agent defensive tackle Evan Anderson would be in the starting lineup, and he was a nice little player for them last year, a nice find, but he's a rotational guy. So pick 11, pick 43, pick 75. At this point, almost all have to be hits on the defensive line for you to think that you are going to replenish that talent on the defensive line that's really made the thing go since they showed up in 2017.
How close are you to saying this team, as it's currently constructed, the core of this team, you mentioned a lot of those guys, George Kittle, Trent Williams, Fred Warner, Christian McCaffrey, that as a core, their window to really competing is either closing or closed? The pause says a lot, Brian. I'm going to be honest.
the big window was open, and it's now a different window. So it's either like a portal that you got to kind of squeeze through, or you're looking for a different window and you're framing it out, and maybe it's a nice big one with a sliding door. We'll see how that next window looks. But their shot was the 2023 season. They lost that Super Bowl against the Kansas City Chiefs. That was their best team. That was their best roster, top to bottom. They had good injury luck that year. That was the year to do it. They're not going to be that good of a football team top to bottom, probably in the Brock Purdy era, because you can't spend around him unless they draft just amazingly. And so it's a different window. They still have enough talent. They can still win. We thought the Buffalo Bills were in a transition year last year, and they were very good. We thought the Denver Broncos, I thought the Denver Broncos were not going to be a good football team really at all last year. They had $90 million in dead money, and guess what? They got even better. So if you have coach and quarterback and you get that right, you can change a lot, and you can change on the fly. Do the 49ers have that? And it can go one of two ways. Oh man, we've got our coach, quarterback. Kyle Shanahan is such a good coach. You bring in Robert Saleh, better special teams coordinator now, and you're just better across the board because of those entities in place, and you got the right quarterback, then everything else you can transition around. If they pay Brock Purdy $55 million per year, and it turns out that he needs all that help that we talked about from the 2023 season, which is dwindling around him, and you paid him all that, and you're 6-11 again, then you got big problems. And so, the 49ers once tried to get cheap at quarterback, which I don't think should be the goal. I think the goal should be to be great at quarterback. Yeah. So you're either expensive and great, or you're cheap and bad, or you could be great and cheap, which is awesome for a short time until you got to pay that guy. But what you really, really don't want to be at quarterback is mediocre and expensive. So it's really all about Brock Purdy now. Can he carry the team in a new era going forward? That's the new Super Bowl window.
I wanted to ask you about that, because that feels like one of the lessons of this 49ers build. Are there any more that you can think of as you look back at the last 8 years when they had really good chances, a couple of them, to win the Super Bowl and come up short? And let's just take as understood, not play Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl is always a good lesson.
That's always a great lesson. And if you play Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl, you better have a damn good defensive line to go make it problematic for him every time he drops back. And the 49ers nearly did that in 2019. We saw the Philadelphia Eagles do that this past year. The 49ers, you quarterback, head coach. After that, defensive end, defensive tackle. All about the defensive line affect the other team's quarterback. And the 49ers have to be better there. And they have to hit on some draft picks. And don't be shocked if they go D-line in the NFL draft this year. Maybe throw an offensive lineman in there. Although I thought they might have done that last year. And Kyle Shanahan likes his toys too. So they went Ricky Pearsall in the first round. And so you never know about that. Other lesson, don't spend a second, third, fourth, fifth round pick to trade for a running back. Because guess what? The Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey 49ers got just as far as the Jimmy Garoppolo, Raheem Mostert San Francisco 49ers did. And I know this offseason and this season, and everyone's like, oh, the running backs are making a comeback. Saquon Barkley wasn't even the leading rusher on his football team that won the Super Bowl, right? And he's a nice story, and that's the icing on the cake when you drop a running back into a really good team. But the story is the defensive line of the Philadelphia Eagles. The story was the defensive line of the San Francisco 49ers in the past. And if you are going to add a running back, make sure it's a free agent running back on a short-term deal, and you're not trading a bunch of draft picks to do it, because the 49ers could really use those 4 draft picks they spent on Christian McCaffrey. Maybe be smarter in this transition period to trade Christian McCaffrey now if he has any value after he's been banged up. Those 3 first-round picks for Trey Lance could help out too.
Yeah, don't miss on the quarterback if you're going to trade 3 first-round picks. Like, I think it is an underrated story how lucky the 49ers got to find Brock Purdy, because who knows where they would be if they hadn't done that. I'll finish here, Brian. For my audience here, Locked On Packers, I want to ask about Aaron Banks. What did you see there? You and I chatted a little bit offline about it. What didn't work about it in San Francisco, and where do you see him fitting best?
So it kind of goes along with what we were talking about with the 49ers and their roster building. It's like, okay, well, Aaron Banks is a good player, starting offensive guard in the NFL. The 49ers shouldn't have paid him $19 million. I don't think the Packers necessarily should have either, but he's a good player. So that's what free agency is. You overpay to get a good player. He's better than the guy that you would have had, playing for you. He was a player that I didn't think had great feet coming out of college, was more of a power player, gap player. I didn't think he'd fit the wide zone very well. He took a red shirt his first year, not because of injuries, but just because, Laken Tomlinson was in front of him and he was a free agent. That was kind of the succession plan, but he didn't play at all. Like, he wasn't even suited up a lot of times on Sundays because he was a guard only player. And it was like, oh man, is this guy a complete bust in the top 50? But he changed his body and he looked a lot different and he moved better his second year. And it was really good his second year. Started out year 3 really well. Kind of had some injuries and then took a step back, and he's been somewhat good, not great, mediocre to good in the rest of his year and a half as a 49er. So he's a solid player. I think character-wise, people really like him. I think he'll work hard, and he's a tough guy, and you can always do something with tough, smart guys up front. Not a $19 million per year guy. So he was a smart no sign for the San Francisco 49ers, especially if they're worried about how much cash they're spending. But man, he's better than a turnstile. That's for sure. Is that what we're doing these days? $20 million a year for just to be above the line.
Yeah. You know what? If you look at the market, it kind of does. It kind of is what we're doing. So it's one of those funny things. Brian, I appreciate the time, man, as always. All right. Thanks to Q and Brian for joining the show today. Thank you for making Locked On Packers your first listen. For your second listen, you go check out Locked On NFL with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Back next week, we got a guest next week. CJ West, the defensive tackle from Indiana, is going to join us. I believe that's going to be next week. We'll see. Let's run it next week. I promoted it. Let's run it next week. So we're going to have some fun. He's a big dude. He could be on the Packers' radar. I think the Packers are going to take one, at least, if not 2 defensive tackles. He could be one of them. So that's next week. A lot more to come as we head toward the NFL draft, which is now, 6 weeks away? I'll be there. I'll be there in Green Bay. A lot of fun stuff coming that week for you as well. Follow me on all the social medias, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on all the social medias. Subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get podcasts, so you can stay Locked On Packers.